The wind howled through the narrow mountain pass, like a warning from the earth itself. Snow drifted along the rocky path, coating the wooden buildings of the tiny trading settlement in pale white. It was the kind of place travelers only stopped at if they had nowhere else to go. And tonight, one man had arrived with a heavy heart, an empty silence following him like a shadow. Jeremiah Cole was known in the mountains as a hard man, a mountain man who spoke little, trusted few, and lived alone in a rough cabin deep in the timberline. People said the wilderness had carved the softness out of him years ago. They said grief had frozen whatever remained. Jeremiah stepped into the dim trading hall, boots thudding against old wooden planks. Inside, lantern light flickered across tired faces. Miners, hunters, drifters. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and cheap whiskey. He ignored the whispers that followed him. Everyone knew Jeremiah Cole. Everyone knew he had once been a different man before the mountains took his family in a brutal winter storm 5 years ago. Since then, he had lived like a ghost among the trees. At the far corner of the room, a loud voice cut through the noise. $20, that's all she's worth. Laughter followed. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. He turned his head slowly toward the sound. A thick-bearded trader stood beside a young girl who looked far too small to be standing in a place like this. Her clothes were worn thin, and her hands clutched a small cloth bag like it was the only thing she owned. The girl kept her eyes lowered. "Come on now," the trader barked. "Someone take her off my hands. She eats, she works, she talks too much. $20. The room stayed silent. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted responsibility. Jeremiah watched quietly from the shadows. Something about the way the girl stood there, silent, alone, surrounded by men who looked at her like she was a broken tool, sent a strange feeling through his chest. He didn't like it. Didn't understand it either. The trader laughed again. "What? Nobody? Fine, I'll drop it to 15. The girl didn't move, didn't speak. But Jeremiah noticed something strange. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She just stood there like someone waiting for the world to finish being cruel. Jeremiah stepped forward. The floor creaked under his boots. The room went quiet. The trader squinted at him. "Well, look here. The mountain ghost himself." Jeremiah reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a small stack of worn bills. He placed them on the table. 20. The trader blinked, surprised the deal happened so fast. "You serious?" Jeremiah's voice was low and calm. "Take it." The trader grabbed the money instantly, like he feared Jeremiah might change his mind. "She's yours." The words hung in the air like something ugly. Jeremiah turned toward the girl. Up close, she looked younger than he first thought. Maybe 17, maybe 18. Hard to tell with hunger and cold carving lines into someone's face. Her eyes finally lifted to meet his. They were gray, quiet, watching, not afraid. That unsettled him even more. "You coming?" he asked. She nodded once. No hesitation, no question, just a small step forward. The room murmured as they walked out into the freezing night. Snow fell softly under the pale moon. Jeremiah led his horse from the hitching post. He lifted the saddlebag and tied the girl's small cloth bag beside it. She stood silently, watching him work. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice was soft but steady. Jeremiah helped her onto the horse first before climbing up behind her. The animals shifted under their weight before stepping slowly onto the dark mountain trail. For a long time they rode without speaking. The wind moved through the pines like distant whispers. Finally the girl spoke. "Why did you buy me?" Jeremiah stared ahead into the forest. "Didn't like the way they looked at you." She considered that quietly. "You could have just walked away." Jeremiah didn't answer, because the truth was, he almost had. They rode for nearly 2 hours before the small cabin appeared between tall pine trees. Smoke drifted from the chimney where embers from the morning fire still glowed faintly. Jeremiah dismounted first and helped her down. "This is it," he said simply. She studied the cabin. It was rough, but sturdy. The kind of place built by hands that expected winter to fight back. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine sap. A small table stood near the fire pit. 2 chairs, one narrow bed against the wall. The girl stepped inside slowly like someone entering a church. Jeremiah hung his coat and stirred the coals back to life. Flames flickered again, filling the room with warm light. He handed her a tin cup of water. "Drink." She did, slowly, like someone who had learned not to waste anything. Jeremiah leaned against the wall, studying her quietly. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated. "Lena." He nodded once. "Jeremiah." She looked around the cabin again before speaking. "You live here alone?" "Yes." Another pause stretched between them. Snow tapped softly against the window. Finally, Lena reached into her small cloth bag and pulled out something wrapped in old paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. Jeremiah noticed. "What's that?" She swallowed before answering. "The reason I needed someone to buy me." Jeremiah frowned. "Meaning?" Lena slowly unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small silver locket. Old, scratched, but clearly important. She stared at it for a long moment before speaking again. "I didn't let them sell me because I was helpless." Jeremiah felt a strange unease creeping into his chest. Lena lifted her eyes toward him. "I let them sell me because I needed someone strong enough to take me into these mountains." Jeremiah straightened slightly. "Why?" Her voice became quieter now, almost fragile. "Because my little brother is out there." The words hit him like sudden thunder. Lena's fingers tightened around the locket. "They took him 3 months ago. Bandits moving through the passes." Jeremiah's jaw hardened. "And you think he's in these mountains?" Lena nodded slowly. "I know he is." Silence filled the cabin. The fire crackled softly between them. Jeremiah felt something heavy pressing against memories he had buried long ago. He looked toward the dark window where the forest stretched endlessly beyond the cabin walls. "That's a big mountain range," he said carefully. Lena's voice trembled for the first time. "I know." Jeremiah rubbed his hand across his beard, thinking, "You expect me to help you find him?" Lena didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer and placed the silver locket into Jeremiah's hand. When he opened it, he froze. Inside the locket was a tiny picture of a boy, and behind him stood a man Jeremiah recognized instantly. A man he had once hunted through these very mountains years ago. A man who should have been dead. Jeremiah's heart dropped into his stomach. Slowly, he looked back up at Lena. Her eyes were filled with quiet desperation now, and the words she spoke next shattered the silence inside the cabin. "Please, help me find my brother." And Jeremiah realized something that made the cold mountain air feel suddenly heavier, because the man in that locket was the same outlaw who had destroyed Jeremiah Cole's life 5 years ago. Jeremiah's fingers tightened around the small silver locket as if the metal itself had suddenly turned heavy. The fire crackled beside them, but the warmth in the cabin no longer reached him. His eyes remained fixed on the tiny photograph inside the locket. The outlaw's face was older than he remembered, but there was no mistaking it. The sharp eyes, the scar across the brow, the cruel half-smile that had once haunted Jeremiah's nightmares for years. Caleb Rourke. Jeremiah slowly closed the locket and exhaled through his nose. Lena watched him carefully. "You know him?" It wasn't a question. Jeremiah lifted his eyes to her again. For a long moment he said nothing. The mountains had taught him that words were dangerous things, but memories were worse. 5 winters ago, Jeremiah had a wife, a small boy, a warm cabin that echoed with laughter instead of silence. Then Caleb Rourke and his men came riding through the mountains like wolves, outlaws hiding from the law, taking whatever they needed to survive. Food, horses, shelter. And when Jeremiah tried to stop them, Everything burned. The memory struck him so suddenly he had to turn away for a moment. Lena noticed the shift in his expression. "You've seen him before." Jeremiah walked slowly toward the small window of the cabin. Outside, snow drifted through the dark forest. The mountains stretched endlessly into shadow. Somewhere out there, a ghost from his past might still be breathing. "I hunted him once," Jeremiah said quietly. Lena stepped closer. "And?" Jeremiah's voice became rough. "I thought he was dead." Silence returned to the cabin. Lena looked down at the locket again. Her fingers brushed the small photograph of the boy inside. "My brother's name is Daniel," she said softly. "He's 12. Jeremiah remained by the window, staring into the night. "How do you know Rourke took him?" Lena swallowed. "Because I saw them." Jeremiah turned slowly. Her voice trembled slightly now, but she continued. "They came to the settlement where we were staying. They were looking for supplies. My brother tried to run." Her hands tightened around the locket. One of them grabbed him. Jeremiah felt a knot forming in his chest. Lena forced herself to continue. "Rourke stopped them from shooting him. He said the boy could be useful, small enough to travel fast through the passes." Jeremiah's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what that meant. A scout, a pack runner, a child forced to work for men who didn't care if he survived the mountains or not. "I followed their trail for 2 weeks," Lena said quietly, "but I couldn't keep up." She looked around the cabin again. "That's when I realized I needed help." Jeremiah crossed his arms slowly. "So you let someone sell you?" Lena nodded once. "Because I knew only a mountain man could track them up here." Jeremiah looked at her carefully now. The girl standing in his cabin wasn't weak. She wasn't helpless either. She had walked into a room full of strangers and allowed herself to be traded like property just to reach these mountains. That kind of determination wasn't something you saw every day. "Why didn't you tell the law?" Jeremiah asked. Lena gave a faint, bitter smile. By the time they arrived, the trail would be gone. Jeremiah knew she was right. The mountains swallowed tracks faster than any sheriff could ride. The fire popped loudly beside them. Lena finally spoke again, her voice quieter now. "I know it's dangerous." Jeremiah said nothing. "And I know you didn't buy me to chase ghosts through the mountains." She looked directly at him again. "But I don't have anyone else." The words hung in the warm cabin air. Jeremiah stared at the floor for several seconds before walking slowly toward the table. He placed the locket down carefully beside the lantern. "Rourke isn't just a thief," he said. Lena waited. "He's the kind of man who burns everything behind him." Her voice trembled. "Then my brother needs help even more." Jeremiah rubbed a hand over his face. "The smart thing would be to send her back to the nearest town tomorrow. Give her some money. Tell her to forget this impossible search." The smart thing. But Jeremiah Cole had stopped being a smart man a long time ago. He looked at the locket again. The tiny picture of the boy stared back at him. And behind the boy, Caleb Rourke's face smiled like a shadow from the past. Jeremiah slowly picked up the locket again. "How long ago did they take him?" 3 months. That meant the trail would be nearly gone. But not impossible. Not for someone who knew these mountains better than the wolves themselves. Jeremiah closed the locket with a soft click. He looked at Lena again. "If Rourke is alive," he said slowly, "he won't be alone." Lena nodded. "I know. Men like him travel with guns." "I know. And they won't hesitate to kill anyone following them." Her eyes didn't waver. "I know." Jeremiah studied her face for a long moment before asking the final question. "If we find them, and your brother isn't alive anymore, what then?" For the first time, Lena's expression cracked. Pain flashed across her eyes like lightning, but she answered anyway. "Then at least I'll know." The cabin fell silent again. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees. Jeremiah finally turned toward the door and grabbed his heavy coat. Get some sleep, he said. Lena blinked. Why? Jeremiah opened the door. Cold mountain air rushed into the cabin. Because at sunrise, he stepped outside into the snow and looked toward the endless black mountains where Caleb Rourke might still be hiding. His voice carried back through the doorway. We start hunting. And for the first time in 5 years, Jeremiah Cole felt the mountains calling him to war again.